Hello everyone and welcome to yet another Coding Chill. I'm your host, Johnny. We usually do these on Fridays, but I did miss last Fridays, and for that I apologize, but I'm here today in a bonus stream that may be shorter than usual, maybe not. I'll move right on to the agenda, but do know that we will have another one this Friday. Suggest as always in the comments what you may want to see then. I am trying to find and carve out the time so I can do maybe a couple streams per week. So maybe Tuesday I can do something like Code Wars challenges or whatever else interests you. Definitely let me know. I do read your comments and I try to accommodate. But today we're gonna do stuff with meta tags with Svelte. And to explain what's the point of the meta tags and what they are, I'm mostly talking about these things that you can add to your HTML, to your website. So when you share them on WhatsApp, on various DMs, as you slide in on Twitter or Discord or wherever else, you'll get a nice snippet, a nice preview of what the content is about. That preview can be much more eye-grabbing than having a link that may look ugly as well. So we can test it out on my own site and in this metatags.io site that I found that may have some sponsors, but I haven't really investigated. They are a nice tool that I use. I don't have any sponsors or affiliates or anything like that, so I just share tools that I find useful. And on my side, you can see that you have like my huge mug. I could probably design something a bit better here if you do share most of the links in the site. But if you go to a blog post, then you get a maybe prettier snippet there if you share on Twitter or wherever else. You can go much more advanced than this. I don't have a Brain Bible or a dedicated designer to create those snippets, but what I've seen on Twitter and other socials is definitely that people have been including the title or the big takeaway of a post in bold letters, and then they have like a gradient or even a nice image as they have now, but maybe blurred, so people will see the nice typeface and be grabbed and be maybe clickbaited or legit baited if the content is actually legit into clicking. So at this point, mentioning clickbait, I should mention that I'm not an SEO expert. And in this day and age, I would be skeptical about anyone that is saying that they are an SEO expert. Not that they don't exist, they exist, but I would want to see their credentials. I would want to see what exactly do they mean and what's their portfolio. What have they done to make this client rank first in these keywords or something like that. When I talk SEO, it stands for Search Engine Optimization, but usually people mean when people search for something that I sell on Google, and definitely if they search for my name, those my site, my app come up first in the results. And good SEO, boosted SEO can help with that. But it's not the 2000s anymore, the early 2000s anymore, so it's much harder to actually make the Google algorithm and any search engine like you as it used to be back in the day. It's not as simple as creating this social snippet. It's not as simple as adding a few meta tags. And that's why I'd be skeptical of anyone saying SEO expert. Today, we will be achieving this by adding a few meta tags. So maybe you can add SEO expert on your CV if that's all it takes, but I don't think so. Real SEO nowadays does take a lot of link building and takes, I don't know, being a wizard, I suppose, to actually know what the algorithms are doing behind the scenes to rank some results first. So speaking of Twitter, Twitter can be a search engine as well. If people click on something that you share, maybe the algorithm will like you more, maybe they promote you in their timeline feed. That's not actually time-based, but it's like promotion-based, engagement-based, who knows. But it's very likely that Twitter is in their best interest that people click on links and go to other websites using the in-app browser, which allows them to track quite a lot of things and enrich your user profile with various tags. So then they know what how to target you with ads better. Anyway, that is a big subject. Feel free to ask me for more in the chat, and give me just one moment to add the chat in another window here so I can check what everyone is saying. All right, we're in. Well, I'm in. I'll just slide this to my other window. This session not brought to you by the iPad Pro that I do have here as my second screen, which has been working quite well, at least when I use a cable to connect it to my regular screen. When I try to do it without cables, it's a bit trickier. So say hi in the chat, let me know what you'd like to see next. And if not, we'll see how, hopefully I've explained the point of meta tags. I won't go into the bait of boost your SEO and all of that. I will say that if you're messaging, if you've created something nice, so in our TechieCat website, we have created a little game in the previous streams. It's quite cool. Maybe you're excited because you made the game yourself, and then you're sharing on Discord or you're sharing to your friends. But what you actually get as a snippet for that, well, that's never gonna work. Everything we do does get deployed, so you can click around yourself. So for TechieCat, you share that on Discord, and what you get is just this. No fancy card, no fancy image for you to make it feel like you're sharing something that's really legit, nothing to make people more likely to click on it. So we're gonna add a nice preview image here. So when you share on Twitter or Discord, wherever else, people will be more likely to click the cool stuff that you've done. If that helps SEO or not, if that helps Twitter promote you, that's another story that we won't be tackling further today. I did add it as a list item, but actually I think I've pretty much talked about this in this opening. So this game and everything else we've built using SvelteKit, which is a front-end framework, full-stack framework, meta framework, call it however you want. We are using JavaScript or TypeScript, which is a language that is the most popular language in the world, I'd say, as far as programming languages go. And in the end, it results in some HTML getting into your browser to render and see some very interactable functionality. What we'll be doing is adding some relevant meta tags that will help Twitter, Facebook, any other site that is adhering to the OpenGraph protocol know what's best to show when a link to that website is shared. Hello, Cogify Media. So how you do that with Svelte in general is that you use a special element called a Svelte head tag. And if we go to our editor, we'll be able to see that, let's say for our main index page, let's navigate to it. So with Svelte and SvelteKit, we have our source directory, our routes directory, and that directory for our index page now has a page.svelte. And in here, we have added a title tag, which is what you get when you bookmark this or when you see it in a tab up here. And if none of the other meta tags that we're gonna add today exist, then most things will try to steal this, use this, and render. But we probably wouldn't want to use the same title for the card meta title, because as you can see, usually the domain of the website of your app is going to be also listed somewhere in the card. So why say it again in the title? Usually you'd have something more eye-grabbing there. So we'll be getting to that soon enough. The other thing we have, besides the page.svelte, that's just about the index page, is that we have a layout.svelte. And in here, we could, in theory, be adding the Svelte head tags as well. That's something that we'll expand upon in the future. And what we also have is an actual HTML page somewhere called app.html. And that is where I've added a hard-coded meta description, which is, since everything else is injected into the body or the head, this is the description that this site is pulling from here. Ideally, we'd want this to be dynamic, so if someone goes to a specific part of the site, they'd see something more relevant there. I don't have an SEO expert or a content expert to help me out with what to put there. We'll figure something out. But since we want this to be dynamic per page, we can take it out here and add it in our index page. So source routes, there is no other directory, so this corresponds to the index page in page.svelte. In our UI, we're gonna paste in a meta tag with a name description. And according to what this CSS tricks page is saying, the meta tags that you really need for a nice card to be created in anything that adheres to the OpenGraph protocol, or Twitter. There are a few where Twitter is falling back to an OpenGraph tag, but there are some special ones for Twitter that we can add. If we manage to add most of those, then we'll be able to have a nice tag for us. So let's copy that wholesale and take it from there. The OG title, we mentioned that we probably don't want it to be something that is the same as the title in the separate title tag, because that's what you see on your browser, where usually it's common to have like something fun, like a bracket, maybe an emoji or whatever else. That's a bit of rudimentary information. The card is going to have the domain, for example, so maybe you don't want to repeat what you have there. This is more important for individual content. So if we have the games tab for the memory game, we maybe not want, it may not be to our best interest to repeat TechieCat there, which is the name of the site and the name of the domain. So these should usually be different, the OpenGraph title to the regular page title. And a common thing would be remove the prefix, just add this. Again, don't judge me on the content. It's not that important. We'll get someone to create great content for us. To explain the type, they have a link on the CSS Tricks website on what's actually allowed in the OpenGraph protocol, but I do find this is quite hard to read. I say that for most sites, what you want is the article, subtype there, entity type, because I don't think they have, this is just the website. So that's what we'll be going for here. So there is no type for game, which is what we'd want in that other page. Enough of my face. So type, I think we can stick this to article. If there are people that know more about this in the comments, do let me know. The big thing here is the image. We will be creating one live, I guess, in Figma, just for the fun of it today. But there is a site that I use just for lorem ipsum placeholder type images called placeholder.com, which actually is doing dynamically generated images as well. So you can see that if I paste this image here, then it's gonna have dynamic dimensions according to what I specify here, plus a dynamic text according to what I give it in this search parameter, which can be inspiring for you if you decide to make your server render dynamic thumbnails and no-cell snippet images for you. But we'll touch on that later in this stream episode. In any case, the question is, how big should this image be? So I do think this article also mentions that there is a ratio that we'd want to adhere to. It's not the Instagram crop, it's something much wider. And some people say up to this or larger. So just for this side, we can say that we want this PNG image and make the text be techie cat. Too big. Oh well. I guess they are afraid they're gonna run out of money with requests like this. They suggest half the size, which should be enough. Still too big? Maybe it's too big. Have I only used this site for thumbnails? Maybe. Was there actually a different way to do this? Was there a slash somewhere? They're happy with this. And all we want is 600Y, right? 600 to 90, happy with that. We got there. I wonder what the problem is. The problem was, is it the space? Maybe I needed to escape the space. All right, so let's try to use this as a placeholder image. For now. And actually, since we mentioned that this seems to be working now, let's do the bigger one. Not too bad. So let's add it here. I'm not sure if socials would actually allow for images with query params like this, but hey, we'll find out. I guess worst case, it would default to this, which just says the size. Worst case, it's not gonna work at all. So maybe let's add it like this. So we'll be able to see it like this. And OG URL, what does that do? The canonical URL, so I guess this should be where we're actually in. In this instance, we're in a localhost. It's localhost 5173 port. When we're deployed live, it's techie.cat and whatever else URL you have. But when you deploy with Vercel or somewhere else, you may have preview deployments, PR deployments, that sort of thing. So how do we get the URL we're actually in? I think for other episodes, we have gotten the href by doing this, window location href, which is cool, but since we're entering this server side, then we won't actually know what the URL is. Maybe it's part of the request. Maybe. Let's see if SvelteKit has any helper for the URL. I think they put it in the request somewhere. When I say Svelte, I mean SvelteKit. That's a different docs. maybe it's the event. I am thinking that we won't be messing further with API-HTML. Our page.svelte, this is where we want a dynamic URL for this, canonical URL. But how do we get that on our page.server? Maybe in the event we have the URL here, looks like a thing. And my question is, what is that URL? So let's try to render it. The plus page of server.ts is the shadow or sibling or whatever you want to call it nowadays, loading endpoint, whatever we return from this method. Then in our Svelte component, our Svelte page component, it's going to have a data property that is going to have whatever we return in this object. So data, that object corresponds to this object that we return from our load method from the sibling file. Plus page.svelte is our UI, plus page.server.ts is what we load server side. So I can see that this has already rendered something. I guess this is the URL object, which is not what we want. But from the URL object, we can get the href, which is probably what we want. So it should be happy now. And if we inspect what we've got in our head, we are indeed getting localhost 5173, which is what we want. And if we do the same in a different page, I'm sure we'll see that it is going to have the /about/ whatever else. The only thing to watch out here is if you have multiple pages, if you have a www versus non-www version, things like that that should be taken care of or are taken care of from my deployment using CNAME redirects. So if you go to the www domain, then you can't actually go to the www domain. You get redirected to the one without a www. This is what I prefer. I've heard people saying that www is recommended and always redirect to there, but I don't think it actually matters so long as you're consistent. So all of my site always strips the www because I don't like having things that can also not be there, which is why I don't use semicolons. So since this is not a URL object, what I'm trying to think is, should I name this like canonical URL? And the cool thing with how SvelteKit works nowadays is that it automatically generates this type here. So it knows that URL doesn't exist anymore, but there is canonical URL. And we also have this Twitter card, summary large image. Twitter, there are a few different options of what type of card you are actually able to show. But I think the consensus is like the bigger the better. The bigger image you can get away with, the bigger image you can get Twitter to embed, the better for you. People are more likely to click on it. So using summary large image for everything is probably good. All right, what else do we have? Recommended ones. So the description, I do think this is fine to be the same as the description that you have there in the meta tag with name description. So let's extract this to a variable or a const and use it here. And use it here too. The site name is of course SvelteKit. And placeholder image for now. I'm sure we'll find a nice cat playing with yarn or something. Let me know of your favorite cats. If you have open source cat images to share, please do. And then they have a section for analytics. I'm not using Facebook and that sort of tracking for sure, so I don't need that. But if you do have a Twitter account for your website, which if you're paid to create a website, you likely have a Twitter account that a team is running, or you have your own account, I guess, like I would have like Jay McGrippis for this, and a dedicated techie.cat Twitter account. You should add it there. To be honest, I do find Twitter is sometimes useful for learning stuff and finding out some cool things that are happening. Dan Number has been recently kind of active with a very interesting thread, but most of the time it gives me notifications for things that kind of work me up, so I've not been using it that much. In any case, for our index page, this may mean that we should have a decent one for now. I did upgrade dependencies like I like to do and live on the edge before each episode, so let me do a upgrade dependencies commit. And the rest, we've removed the description from the app.html static file. What did I do in the header? Did I do anything interesting? Ah, right. That goes with the dependency upgrade, actually. They changed $app/env to be $app slash environment, which isn't that bad. And I do have an alias for git commit amend. So they should take care of that. We did change our static app HTML. In our server, we're returning the canonical URL, which every load method gets. This is a URL object, and we're getting the href to be the whole URL, I suppose. I wonder, should the canonical URL include search parameters? We can find that out in the future. Just use the URL that was shared. Yeah, the way that works, I'd say that, all right, we did go over a bit how page.server works again, but we ain't actually gonna use canonical URL. I'm not convinced we actually need it. So what we really added was extracting the description into a const, so we can reuse it in the OG description method property. We added a title that should be different from the one you have in your title in the title tag. We've added a type of article, which I'm not sure about, but I think for most things this should be fine. And then we have the image that we'll get in the card, which is probably the most important thing, the most eye-grabbing thing. So we'll create a custom one later. And we're specifying for Twitter that we want the share type, the snippet type, to have a summary in the large image, which I think is the most useful one. We're also adding the description, as we said, and specifying the site name and giving a placeholder for the Twitter ultimates, which will change when we have a dedicated image when we craft it in Figma. So not much done either. I will be cheeky and say this. is an improved SEO commit. I'm using the Gitmoji convention where each type of commit can have its own emoji, so you can more easily recognize it. Let's be honest, it's just like emojis, so I use them as much as possible. And publish that branch, so we can go to GitHub and raise a PR, so we can check with meta tags IO whether this works. All right. Fine time for a coffee break. I didn't add my noodle timer, but I will add it after this. I am doing well. Hope everyone else is doing well as well. We are slowly edging to the midpoint of the week, which is always exciting. So the preview page, we haven't broken anything, which is great. But now, if we copy this, I'm hoping we'll get the placeholder tag there. Great. So this is the domain. This is still the title, interestingly enough, but you can see how the Twitter shares it. It has the page title, so that's from the title meta tag here. We're learning as we go. So Twitter will have the title from the title tag, and then the description, and then I guess it's just not gonna use the OG title. So I don't see this anywhere in the page. Guess it's a sub part of the other thing. I wonder. I've definitely heard something regarding this back in the day. I wonder why this is not appearing. We'll figure it out. For now, let's make this a bit more fun by creating our own meta tag and not use the one from this service here. The way we can do that, well, the way I do that is with Figma. You can see that's how I do my YouTube thumbnails as well as some of the images for this site. And we can create a canvas, a new frame. Not a Figma expert. And I wonder, is a Twitter header? I don't think so. Is this a Twitter header? Twitter post, 1200 675. How much did we ask for? 1200 630. So I guess not. It's this, it's Facebook post, I guess. I wonder if we should optimize for Twitter. Anyway, I guess this covers both. So let's add this in. Immediately I'm going to resize it by instinct. Well, I can just zoom in. And I wonder, can I make this like a gradient fill? How does this work? I suppose I don't need to learn Figma on the fly. I may just go to my brand colors and use the grayest gray, and then use the techie cut color or something to write some text. Ooh. Thank you, Tieke. From the chat, in the color picker top left, you can choose solid or gradient. Guess I need to break the link there. Oh, magic. But how do you add the stops? Yes, this is the one stop. And we can start it like this. This is where you can really tell I'm not a designer. Wow. And how do we mess with the angle? Here? Beautiful. All right, so maybe this, it's like darker, lighter. Who knows where the stop actually is? Fun with Figma for sure. Cool, I'll consider this mission accomplished with the gradient, thanks again. That's also something that's maybe easier to do if you have like a dedicated team working on Figma. They will come up with a much nicer gradient than what you'd be able to render on the server. And what font am I using in this site? Nap HTML, can check and see that it's overpass. So let's make that match the brand. Maybe this should be part of the same thing. Maybe not. So let's say that this is a... That if you haven't noticed, whenever, even though I'm not a designer, whenever I have to do like something that resembles design in that sort of work, I love it. I get super involved. Nope. There must be a distribute button somewhere. Auto layout? Nah. Glancing at the chat, maybe there is sage advice again. There must be somewhere. It's not resources. I used it before. I'm thinking of a distribute evenly type of thing. It seems like it's this, but do I need the container selected too? To say I want it against this? Maybe. Tidy up. What does that mean? I'm just hoping that the guide will try to magically appear somewhere to tell me that whether this is the same way from this box to this box. Oh well, enough of struggles in Figma. I guess I could add like this from the episode on Stripe. yeah, auto layout, but I can try it and auto layout. Yeah, I can say that I want it to be from the top of the page to here. Hug, that seems nice, but what exactly does it do? Don't really know. Like as I promised before, I will stop with the struggles here. Thank you, Spiky, for suggesting this. But as I've said before, maybe all we really need is also an emoji, I guess. Relevant cat emoji. We'll try it again. Oh my god. But why doesn't it align both? This is starting to make sense. Why would it only affect one? Again, I'll take auto layout lessons maybe a bit later. Let's add a huge cut here in emoji form, hopefully in the middle of the page. Imagine that you have your own custom beautiful placeholder here. Export this, I suppose. Export. Desktop for now. And we are on the desktop here, and we can we'll want to add this somewhere we are actually serving. So on the static folder, can maybe have like a meta folder, and in there, if we reveal this in Finder, we may drag and drop this. Call it index preview PNG. Figma, the Spike, is a very, very exciting tool. I think first time I used it, was it like 4 years ago? I was lucky enough to be in a company with amazing designers that were like early adopters and evangelists for Figma. Did enjoy it quite a lot, but of course they could do so much wizardry that I wasn't able to. Let's copy the relative path here and our page.svelte instead of using this service. I think we don't need the static prefix. Ah, interesting that here we need the origin URL. Who would have thought? So let's go back to not this file. So in page.svelte, what I'm saying here now is that this cannot be a relative URL. It needs to be an absolute URL, I can only imagine. So this cannot just be meta index preview. This has to be something that the server tells me. So this file, we did get the URL before, we will want it again, but we'll want the root URL really. It's gonna be URL origin, I imagine. And that's the type of thing that we should validate by inspection. And maybe refresh the page. And so we're looking at this. So if we destructure the root URL from here and use it here, we should be good. Maybe we'll have like an extra trailing slash. No, looks about right. So what we've done now is that we're getting the root URL like this. The server is loading it up. Then we're getting it on the UI and saying that our OpenGraph image is root URL / meta index preview, which is where we've put this amazing image we've created in Figma. And custom snippet image. So we can, did I add nothing? Guess so. So let's go back to the terminal to do a git commit amend. Now everything's here. We can push to our branch, which will get deployed, and hopefully we'll see this in our social snippet previewer once that gets deployed. Let's see how fast Vercel will be this time. The thing is that it is quite fast, and they do deploy per commit. So by the time you've opened the PR, it's already deployed that instance. So it feels even faster. But now that you're just pushing the commit, it feels slower. So let's try this again, and we did it. I guess this meta tags IO tool does allow you to change your social tags here, so you can get the preview of what you actually want to see, and then after you've played around here, then you can make the code change if you want, which is quite cool. Yeah, I think I'll try to find someone to design this a bit nicer, but for now this will do. And our problem, if you can call it a problem, is that if you go to the about page, then we should not have any image yet again. Or more interestingly, if you go to our memory game, you don't get a nice share image. If you do have the time, I would suggest to manually handcraft a nice snippet for every URL on your page, and we'd be doing the same thing really, where the page server did some stuff and then the page UI component did a bit more stuff. But now, instead of going to the about page, for example, and doing the same thing, going to our game's memory page.svelte, making the same changes, page server.ts, I think we'll go straight into abstracting this into our layout component, so we can do it once and move on with our lives. And let's look at the agenda that I had drafted for today. So in individual routes, we did it for the index route, the home page, and I trust that we have the knowledge to do it the same way individually for every other route that we've got here. But that's probably too much work, so let's try to leverage how to do this in our layout component. And my hope is that it would be as easy as taking all the tags from here that we wrote and add them here. But of course, we also want the description, which we derived. And we'd also want the root URL. So if we go to our server component, so from our page.server.ts, we can steal the same thing where we took the URL from there and then we added a root URL. On our layout.server, we can also take out the URL and also return a root URL with the URL origin. But that's maybe not what we want once we go to the about page or somewhere like that. But for now, let's keep it the same and see how we need to refactor. And let's do the same quick and dirty trick that Rich suggests, where right after the data gets created, we can destructure it, get the theme out, get the user out, and get the root URL out. So now we can do this. Ah, that's why I did. That's why I didn't destructure it. Past Johnny knew what he was doing. All right, so this should work the same as before. Points to the correct image and all of that. I guess we do want the origin, so we wouldn't have any problems. But changing this to not be in the root page component and making use of something that the root page.server TypeScript file is returning should mean that even if we go to the about page, we should be getting those meta tags. So we should be getting those nice snippets. Problem is that everything gets the same description and the same title, which is probably not what we want. So we can try going through our pages one by one. You can see that I've manually added a SvelteKit here, which interestingly does get overridden like this. So even though the layout adds a SvelteKit, then I suppose that it's finding out that deeper in it there is another SvelteKit with title that overrides what we've had before. But a way that I've seen this work is that you have your server file, or you make use, I guess, of a meta property or something like that. So let's say that we need a meta property that will have some things that we'll need to figure out that can get overridden by other components further down. Should we call it default meta? I'm not sure. We'll see. Let's call it meta for now, and we'll see. So for we can actually destructure this with the deriving trick. So from data meta, let's destructure. We'll want to destructure title, type, and image. And so should the image just be one object, or because it seems like it has an image URL plus an image alt. So I'd say it has those two things. And maybe that's it. So let's do the title here. Go into our layout server component and say that we've got a title, which is this. Let's say we've got a type, which is article, which may be changing. I'm not sure. Actually, until I find a place where we need to change this, I'm not gonna need it. Description, of course. I forgot about that. So description is what I meant. And we don't need that anymore. And we want an image, and the image is gonna have a URL. This is actually gonna be this, so we won't need to return a root URL anymore. So URL is gonna be this, and alt is gonna be cut plain with yarn. That's what I wanted to put in the first place. Even though that's not the actual image now. And I'm thinking that maybe this can be the let's start with meta here. Let's start with meta here. And now the title. I guess we need two titles yet again. The title is this. For now, the image is image URL. And this is image alt. And I guess this means that we can separate the titles, have a title and an OG title, not a gangsta title, but a OpenGraph title. So what did we actually do? We removed our the thing that we wrote in the previous commit. So no individual logic, no SvelteKit in our page component, root page component. And we've pretty much added all of that in our core layout component. It is gonna be finding that stuff dynamically from data.meta, which it gets from the server, and it just defaults to the ones that we want for our index page for now. And if we confirm that works, then we'll change it. So for the about page, we'll be doing something else. SEO or refactoring, really. Extract meta tag logic to layout and see how that works for us. Can see on my phone that I have a notification from Twitter. I was wondering if it would be like developer blasts Twitter during live stream. Calls it a toxic platform. I think you can use it quite well. That's for sure. It can be a learning resource, but in order for them to optimize for engagement, they will suggest things to you that you'll have opinions on, which is fair enough. So, let's see if Vercel deployed already. It looks like yes. And And we'll do the same thing again. We're expecting that this would still work, but now the about page should also have the same snippet in our game's memory as well. So what we want now, got the about page again. What we want now is for each individual page to have the ability to override the meta tags and have different things showing. And since we're talking overrides, I think it could make sense if we change things a little bit yet again and call this default meta. And then we can check somewhere to see if we've got anything else. So default meta is this. But we can do this one by one actually. So we can say that the title is from data default meta. And the same title. And the same for description. And the same for image. And remove that, and that should make it work again. But what I'm trying to think now is that if there is a data.meta title, then you can use that. Would that make sense? I think so. But for that, we'll need to go to the agenda and see. I guess we did use SvelteKit in a layout component, but now we need to figure out how to do the fallbacks. Because I am wondering about nested parameters. And I think the page store, maybe that's the one that we're looking for. I think everything you've ever loaded in SvelteKit rests in the page store. But just trying to find out where exactly that would reside. I think the stores was the correct one, but contains page data. I remember this having more information in the past, but I do think the page store does have everything that's ever been loaded. Page data. So let's do our classic console log here. So instead of doing data here, let's see. Let's get the page store and log its value. See what we get. It has data here. It has a default meta object, which is great. It has it here as well. And my question is then, if our about page, instead of having a svelte head, it had maybe a load method. And let's figure that out. And that had a meta object. Make that a fat method for consistency, and inline return even. And let's say that our meta object would look like this. But the title would be, what was our title before? Let's see. About TechieCat, sure. But of course it needs to be in a meta key. Let's just return title now. Make our title just be about, because we can even say that instead of using the OG title, which I forgot about, we can say that this is title TechieCat and then just the title. So on the server, instead of using OG title, you can do this. In any case, let's see. Now, does the page store have the meta thingy? If we get to the about page, I guess the answer is no. Expected it to be here. Return some data. Oh well. The question now is, if instead of having this in page.svelte, if I had it in page.server.ts, so if we had a file like this, which looked more like this, I suppose, but this would be a page load, I guess. And we won't need anything. All we need is just a title for about. Forget this. No theme, no user, no nothing. What would happen? Paid server data, I guess. Paid server. We have it for the ideas, and it's called paid server load. Right, so it's this. Should be happy with that. Maybe it will create it eventually. Paid server load from types. Where is it? Yeah, it is this. Right, the TypeScript magic, I'm sure it will create it eventually. Let's refresh. Didn't quite like that. Oof, maybe it wasn't logged in the console, maybe it was logged in the other place. So let's forget this ever happened for now. I can create this page again. In our page svelte file, let's see. Let's try to go to the about page. Is there a meta property here? I don't think there is, for whatever reason. So we do need to do this thing of creating a plus page.server.ts, the about page, export the load method, and all of that. And now when we refresh, we won't be doing this in the load method. we won't be doing anything in the load method. But my hope would be that indeed we get this meta in the object that we're logging out. And where we're doing this, as a reminder, in our layout.svelte in the UI file, we're logging what the page store has. So data from the page store is going to have all the data that has been loaded so far. That includes this part from the server load method for the layout itself. But when you're in the about page, then it's going to have this as well. Mostly makes sense. But we're doing all of that because is this typed, or can it be like anything? Yeah, it doesn't really know what is in the page store, but I think there is a definition file that we can play with. I thought it was up.d2ts, so maybe it is. And I was thinking that you may have been able to type the page store here in this file, but I guess the answer is no. Doesn't really matter. What I'm concerned with, what I want, is the title to be the page data meta title or the default title. So if that is true, if that worked as I expect, then we can see that the title doesn't need to become about/TechieCat, but if we are on the main side, it's Get Inspired to Do More Tech, or indeed if we are, I was going to say if we are on any other page, but this gets overridden by the individual pages. So maybe not the best property to test this with. So let's do it for description. And let's do it for image. And we can potentially create, we should definitely create a description. You need to find the proper apostrophe character, of course. Copy this. So now the description in the about page becomes the one we've explicitly returned in the load method, but in here it does become the default, and in the games it's also the default because we haven't provided an explicit one. So that seems like it's about gonna work, and we won't bother for a different image for every page, but let's bother with a description for every page. So I am gonna copy this page server file because it feels like we're gonna use it. None of this is front facing. Guess this is, but not really SEO like. In the dashboard, this logged in, we'll have this functionality for everyone in the future where you can go to the dashboard and you see this. Maybe I won't do this live. Maybe we only care about the ideas page, which is this, that everyone can go to, Google can go to. And it has a load method here, but what we're saying is that we do not need to add the title manually anymore. What we want is potentially return a meta here with a title of latest ideas and a description. Why not? GitHub Copilot suggestion, I'll take that. And then we should be able to see if this has indeed auto-refreshed. The description does become this. Cool. So this is a front-facing page. The login page is also front-facing. People can get there, remove the head, go to the server, and return meta title description. So this is the page you'd be seeing if you were not logged in, which brings us to the logout page. Doesn't need a head again, but in the server, in the load method, we can return meta. The title would be profile, my profile. The description is including the ideas you have started. Well done, Copilot, you're getting there. Support, nothing in this branch. Webhooks, nothing in this branch. I think that's about it. So let's search for SvelteKit. I would have expected that there would have been only one instance of this, the one in the layout, but we did forget the memory game. So remove it from there, and then the memory game should also be returning meta, title, memory game, description. How did you know? With emojis because of this? That's incredible. And we did see by searching for SvelteKit, there are still a few more places where this happens. So for create idea, is there no load method for this? Guess not. We don't want any of this. All we want is immediately return meta title maybe the title is new idea. Creating idea makes sense. And in here, I imagine, interesting that this one for editing an idea. So if we go to the dashboard, we stop emulating and add this, we should be able to see that if I click, I can edit the idea, and I'm mentioning the name in the title, which is quite high tech, if I'm being honest. We'll need to remember to do the same in the server file. So here we can say meta, and the title is actually going to be edit idea. Whoops, need to go to template literals. Idea name. Maybe put it in quotes. Maybe even have opening and closing apostrophes. Some hot Googling action to find the correct characters. This looks different enough to me. Here we go, it still works. Again, since this is behind a login, I don't think any web crawler would see it, but you know, could be helpful. The title is definitely helpful because you see it here, but we can always skip the description. Right, so with that, we're not done. We still have the my ideas. Dashboard, meta, title, my ideas, dashboard. And with that, we only have one Svelte head and one place with all our meta tags for the fancy social images, and it is in our layout component, which is quite cool. So we can commit this huge refactor. Let's see if I kept a sneaky console log anywhere. I guess the answer is no. So I'm gonna trust that all of this mostly works. We didn't do much different into the layout component. What we did is look for an individual page meta tag if they've loaded in their server file, their sibling server file, or else it goes to the default meta tags, which I guess we could have done away with the server load method. And we needed it anyway in the instance of this app for the theme and the user, so might as well do it like this. So these were the not big changes, defaulting, looking for individual meta tags, but if not, going for the default ones in our layout file. And everything else was making every other route in our page, instead of using SvelteKit and the title individually, use the server load method to return a meta object where you can pass a few more things in there. And that's something that I've seen as a standard way to do that sort of thing with SvelteKit. It is important to do it like that in case you have dynamic content. So if you're doing blog posts, for example, then you wouldn't be able to hard code the individual blog post title, even if you wanted to. So we said that for the about page or for every other page that we've done here, that the option would have been to have some overriding SvelteKits there where you hard code again all the meta tags that you want. But if it's a dynamic page, so if it is based on a dynamic slug or ID, then you wouldn't be able to hard code that this is the blog post for adding Tailwind to Svelte or whatever else. You would need for the server to be fetching the data for that blog post, and then from the data that you'd fetched from your database or Contentful or wherever, then return meta tags anyway. So I think that's why this way of doing the meta tags has been quite popular, but of course we're still not in version 1 of SvelteKit, so maybe something else will emerge. Good news is that I'm not making a video on this, I'm only making a stream. As we know, when I make videos on things, then there are breaking changes. So since there is no video on how to do this, there is a chance that this will remain the recommended way of doing things. Right, joking aside, I think all of this should be good enough. Do I have playwright tests that test for this actually? Do I have playwright tests that will break? I think the answer is yes. Because I do think my navigation smoke test is checking. Maybe not. So the title, I have it that it includes TechieCat, where the index page does include it at the end, but I've changed the order of things. I thought that I was being explicit here, so it would have broken the end-to-end tests. That wasn't the case, so all good. Alright, so specify meta tags using several load methods, which should make this work for every page, and maybe we'll be able to finish with adding a nice image for the memory game, I suppose. How would we do that? I'm not really sure. We'll come up with something, and then we'll just talk about dynamic images for a bit and open the floor to questions for sure. Alright, so Vercel is deploying, but that doesn't really matter. What I really want is a nice image for the memory game. So I want to make this bigger. And we could even have like a little image, I suppose. So if we go to the memory game, what's the coolest image of the memory game we can find? Maybe here on Figma. I do have one already taken from the previous stream. From this. That. I cannot hear sounds on my desktop, so if that was too loud, I apologize. Yeah, it's because I'm trying to have streaming music for you. Did I put it in the auto layout component? Sounds likely. get that out of that frame. So we don't want the cat anymore. Let's say we kinda want this. Smaller. Rounded corners, why not? This is my designing face, so you know it's serious. Do we have any shadows? Yeah, why not? Add drop shadows. Hello, Yar Andrei from Romania in the chat. Thank you for your kind words. I always find very kind when people take the time to tell me that they've been watching my videos on SvelteKit or whatever else. And whenever they tell me that it's actually good. So I'm delighted that I've managed to help you. Keep watching and let me know if there are particulars that you'd like to see me cover. Yes, today people have asked what do you do about SEO, snippets, and all of that. And I thought, because I was suggesting you can create a game, share it with your friends. It's a great, pleasurable experience to be able to create a web game, a JavaScript game, or something like that, and then immediately go to WhatsApp and share to your friends, and then they click the link and they click around, and your friends have played it, and they feel, you know, nice. They feel like you've made something real that made them spend a bit of time happily. But you weren't getting the nice preview events when you were sharing on WhatsApp or wherever else. So I prioritized it. So in case you're following along and creating your own game or whatever else you're making, make it very shareable. When you share to your friends, then you'll get some extra dazzle, some extra coolness points if they do have a nice snippet, nice card like this. Hopefully nicer than this, if I'm being honest to myself. This is not the best design in the world, but hey, it will do. So let's export this. And once again, we'll want to drop that into our meta directory here in the static directory. Meta, I just made it up. Follow your own convention as you please. And if you were keeping this in a database, I guess you'd have a URL to do the actual file. I guess it depends on what I mean by a database. If it was a CMS style of site, it may have like a thumbnail URL or something like that that you'd be able to use. For us, we're just hosting it in Vercel as we're hosting all our JavaScript code. But it does mean what we've done here, we can close our millions of tabs and go to our memory page, page.server.ts plus page.server.ts, and here in the load method, once again in the meta object, we can now return image, and the image is gonna be something that has a URL. Where else did we do this? I guess nowhere else but the layout, and it's gonna be something like this, which means we need the URL object, which we've already had here. Cool. And it's not gonna be index preview, it's gonna be game memory, I guess. Games memory. Let's rename this to game memory. And an alt, since we're not doing anything there, it's not actually an image of a cat. I guess the alt text should be whatever we've put in our image. And we can say that dedicated feature SEO add dedicated image for memory game. Sync those changes. Like a little pattern may go a long way here. But I'm not sure. Are parents cool nowadays? I know that at some point gradients weren't cool, but now they're cool again. Maybe because we're better at rendering gradients now, so they don't look horrible. Josh Como has a nice blog post on this. But what we really care about is to confirm whether our individual pages are working. Oh, this eagerly checks. So, for our memory game, it has this link for all the marbles. Yeah, we're getting our dedicated snippet for that. Looks kinda cool. I'm still not sure why here it's the page title and not the OG title. Maybe I should read the docs. The title of your object as it should appear within the graph, which makes sense. So it's just The Rock, I assume, the famous film with Sean Connery. And not The Rock / IMDb, because you are in the IMDb website. So I would think that here it would just say The Rock memory game, because it would be taking the OpenGraph title. Did we do a mistake with how we specified this? Because we copy pasted from a different site. OG title. Let's find out. So for our layout UI, we are saying OG title and we're giving it this. And if we inspect in the head, just to double check, yeah, it is just memory game. So I'm not sure which socials are using this where, but according to this meta tag previewer, this is using the page title in the actual title tag. Oh well, interesting to know. But with that, I think we can merge this PR and have more shareable stuff to go. This was actually a lot of code, which is quite interesting. I guess I did add a few more server files than before, and I did add these beautiful images. If you're a designer, let me know. Maybe we can work together. Maybe we can create something here. I did laugh, but I am being earnest about this, serious about this. Dead serious. My point was that tests passed, we can merge this while we talk about the final point, which is dynamic images. So if all you want to do is have some text superimposed in a nice gradient or a nice picture or whatever else, then maybe instead of handcrafting this in Figma, then you may be able to have your server serve this image instead. So we may have an API directory inside routes or anything else that may be like a maybe in another social directory you can have an image.ts endpoint which would be capturing the name of the image or any other parameters that you may want to encode there and produce an image dedicated to being in the dimensions that OpenGraph wants, and be basing of a layer or a gradient or an image that you have even in Figma. If you manage to get that automation going, you can hit the Figma API and say, for example, render this whole node and give me the result. And then you can superimpose your own text at some points on the image using a library like SERP, which I suppose is something that this placeholder.com site is doing. So it captures whatever you want the dimensions to be and then what text you want to impose, and you can even specify colors and that sort of thing, and renders an image for you. So you could do the same thing for your site if you wanted to dynamically create those sorts of images for your blog post, so you wouldn't have to handcraft something in Figma. And if your skills are like my Figma skills, so whatever you handcraft on Figma is not something to write home about, then that could be a decent solution. But it is a decent amount of code to do something like that. So I would say, unless you have like tons of blog posts or anything like that, do take the time, maybe get an expert to do it and have them produce something nice that will catch people's eyes if they see it shared in their timeline, if they see it in their DMs. And now, if you remember sharing TechieCat, rendered no image to begin with, but since now Vercel deployment is done, it seems like if we share this page, we do get the nice snippet, the home page. If we share the about page, it does have the same snippet, but does overwrite the information here, which is good. And maybe most importantly, the thing that most people will share, the game that has been capturing the world by storm, the memory game. If they share the memory game, then they get also a dedicated tag that shows the memory game itself, which may make them more likely to click on it. It has the animal tile set, card set as well, which is very cute. But with that, we have talked about how we do dynamic images the same way that placeholder.com would do. Let me know if you want an extra episode of how you'd actually do that using a JavaScript library, because I suspect that they may be using PHP, who knows. They may be using something else for the backend here, and things may be different if you try to do it on Node. Let me know if that's interesting. Let me know any other subject that you'd like to see me cover, because I do want to cover things that you think are useful and are on your minds, not just things that I think are fun. Even though I have my finger on the pulse and try to find things that are fun and useful to you as well. I will take my final sips of coffee for today. If you want to ask me something in the chat, this is the time to do it, or else I'll see you Friday. Or else. Friday will definitely be another coding and chill type of thing. I don't know what the subject will be, as mentioned before. I'm waiting for your suggestions as well to see what it's gonna be. But maybe on Tuesday next time we'll go to a site like CodeWars, which clearly I haven't been in a long time, where they give you those sorts of pub trivia type of challenges that you can see me try to do live and get your imposter syndrome cure dosage if you see me struggle on some. If I actually fly by, then don't feel bad, I've been doing this for a while, but it's likely I'll get stumped. But I may try to do it in a more interesting way, maybe by also trying to create like a front end for this in StackBlitz, so no matter what the spec is, try to visualize it somehow, which may be more interesting than just seeing code. I don't know, something to experiment with. I definitely want to do more content for everyone without giving up the regular created videos. The Playwright one is super long, and even the short videos, 5 to 10 minutes, take me a long time, but whenever it's like over half an hour, it really destroys me. So that may take a while. And in the meantime, I would love to do some extra streams for everyone. Get it off my system, I like coding. and I like the company when I'm doing it live. I realize I was clicking around, well, not actually showing my screen. This is CodeWars. This is the site that does some coding challenges. I would suggest that now in 2022, if people told you to do that, you have to do a coding challenge, you tell them no thanks, I'll go find somebody else and look into other companies. But that's by the by. Not everyone has the I don't know how to put this. Not everyone is comfortable just saying no to an opportunity like that. And I do think that there are good companies that still do coding challenges like this, even though I personally think that it's pub trivia knowledge, that it's cool to have and looks cool, but doesn't actually make you a better colleague or more likely to be a great engineer or anything like that. So I would suggest trying to avoid companies that do have you do tests like this. The reality is there are companies that still do that, and they can be fun. Like if you do it by yourself, I do find them tons of fun. So that's the point of that stream, I suppose. And to make it more interesting, I might try to do a visualization aspect of the problem that will randomly run into something like Code Sandbox or StackBlitz. So something where at the end of the stream you can actually click around and see if they asked us to get like a random number or shuffle a list or get the next biggest number or something like that. We'll have something that we can share, we can pin in a comment, and then you can click around and see that, hey, it works, we did it practically. I also don't like the way they have the tests written. It's very hard to write your own tests, I think, in CodeWars. I don't know if it's changed nowadays. While in something like Code Sandbox for sure, and probably StackBlitz, it is easier to write your own tests and more meaningful tests as well. So that'd be maybe a fun way to see how I approach this. All right, so thanks everyone for watching, especially for the people in the chat that always make me feel like there is company with me coding along or trying to tackle these problems. Coding along. With my accent, it's hard to understand sometimes what I'm trying to say. Coding alone, still fun. Coding with others, supreme fun. So I greatly appreciate you spending your time here. Thanks everyone once again. See you on Friday. Bye bye.